The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Life with Open Pages. We all have a purpose in life. Sometimes we just need a little motivation to point us in the right direction. This show is designed to help you create the life you were meant to live. I'm your host, Michelle Bannister. My goal is to motivate you to make simple life changes so you can experience a life with meaning, direction, love, and peace. Now let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Michelle. Now, before we get started, last Monday's show was canceled due to the death of Emily Slingluff. She was going to be my guest. And I just wanted to share a quick excerpt from the family. It said that the first copies of Mom's latest book, The Most Important Job, A Celebration of Kind Parenting, arrived the day after she died. As you know, she was passionate about kind parenting and would be so pleased that her new book is now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So I hope you'll go out and check out the book, The Most Important Job, A Celebration of Kind Parenting. So tonight, we're going to talk about how to be a productive procrastinator. All adults know that they have to perform certain tasks, even though they might dread doing them. But for some people, about 1 out of 5, these tasks lead to a kind of paralysis in which nothing gets done, causing feelings of shame and guilt. My guest, Patrick Sanaghan, will provide real-world advice on how to master tasks and stop putting off for tomorrow what can be done today. Please welcome to the show, Patrick Sanaghan.
Well, hi, Michelle. It's good to see you.
Oh, hello and welcome. Welcome. So tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm an organizational consultant that has a small consulting firm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 miles north of Philadelphia. Very pretty little place. And I've been consulting for about 30 plus years. A lot of it has been in the higher ed space and in some nonprofits. And early in my career, I did a lot of corporate work. So I played in some different arenas. And the whole notion of the kind of the book was that I do procrastinate about some things, but I'm a very productive procrastinator. I've written 12 books and about 60 published articles and have a thriving consulting business. So I wanted to communicate to people that even though you might procrastinate, you still can be productive.
So that almost sounds like, though, like an oxymoron, almost. So kind of give us some steps in ways that can help people to be a productive procrastinator.
Yeah, sure. I think a couple quick things is that one of the things that I just want to kind of explain what procrastination is from my perspective. Mm-hmm. Usually there's an unpleasant task. That could be a report you have to write or clean up the garage. It could be all kinds of different things. Mm-hmm. And a lot of emotions come up: stress, anxiety, overwhelm. And when you step away from doing the task, your emotional relief is instant. You just go, oh, I don't have all that tension and stress and anxiety. Now, intellectually, you still have to do the task. Like for me, it's always my income taxes. I always tend to procrastinate around my income taxes.
Right.
And but I step away from it, I feel relieved, but I still know, Pat, by April 15th, you still have to do your income taxes. And so it's a very tough habit because it keeps on kind of going round and round because the relief is instant. Okay. And it keeps the habit going.
Okay. Now, in one of the documents that you sent me, there was a question here or a statement: learn how to say no to lazy people. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, most people who procrastinate tend to be nice people. That's been my experience. And I think lazy people know that we're nice, and it's very difficult to say no to a colleague or a friend.
Sure.
And I won't talk about spouses and partners because that's a dangerous territory. But in a collegial thing, the first thing, there's 5 things you can think about. One is rehearse saying no. I mean, when adults hear that, they go, oh, I don't want to do role playing or I don't want to do practice.
Mhm.
You got to practice to say no because it's difficult to do. So you get with a thought partner or a friend or a buddy, and you kind of practice saying no, and it builds your it builds your muscles up about saying no. The second thing you have to think about is don't say yes or no in the moment, because the person knows you're kind of caught, and say, well, let me check with my schedule. Let me get back to the office. I'll call you tomorrow. You don't have to give an answer in the moment.
Mhm.
Create the psychological space for that. The third one is offer them an option. If you know it, one, you can say, Michelle, I'd like to help, but the schedule is pretty full. But if you talk to Mary Smith, who I know really well, I'll give you her email address. She knows how to help you really well. So give them an option, which is a generous thing to do. You don't have to do it by yourself. And then the two other things is that you have to say to yourself, and this is where the rehearsal comes in a little bit, you're not saying no to the person, you're saying no to the opportunity. So
Okay.
it creates some kind of objective space. I'm not rejecting Michelle. I'm not being mean to Michelle.
Mhm.
Michelle said, here's an opportunity. Here's something I need to help with. And I'm not saying no to Michelle as a person. I'm saying no to the opportunity because maybe I don't have the schedule, I don't have the time or the expertise. So
Okay.
that sounds subtle, but it's very important. And the last thing is when you do respond to them, you don't have to do it face to face because it makes it difficult. If you're going to say no, get on the phone, and it's a little bit easier to say no on the phone. And if you've created an option for them, those 5 steps are very reasonable.
Okay. Now, before we go any further, what is the name of your book and where can we find it?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the name of the book, and I'm trying to learn how to do that. It's called How to Be a Better Procrastinator, and
Okay.
it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And it's a book of just practical tools, and hopefully I'll get a chance to share some of those that work with people who procrastinate. And over the last 30 odd years, I've collected research and done articles and asked clients how they manage it. And so
Mhm.
I just created a whole box full of ideas. And then when COVID hit, 2 years ago plus,
Mhm.
I realized my schedule was going to slow down and I had a big box of stuff. So I said, I think there's a book in here. So all of them are commonsensical and very practical things. And most of them are research based. So there's not a theory, it's like research supports it.
Right, right. And I know that, like you said, if there's something that we really don't want to do, we do kind of get that paralysis and then we don't do any of it. And then we think, well, yeah, shoot, I need to get that done. But, the mountain grows and grows and
Yes.
grows. So,
Right.
how can we break that down? I mean, everyone knows, we try and set short-term goals and then maybe some long-term goals, but how can we bite off some of those short-term goals so that we can actually accomplish something?
Yeah. You speak to a very important principle. We call it chewable chunks. So I have
Okay.
to sit down and do a paper or I have to clean out my garage. You don't have to do the whole thing at one time. I can spend maybe 20 minutes cleaning out my garage every other Saturday, and in 3 or 4 months, I'll have a pretty okay garage.
Mhm.
Procrastinators get caught into I have to do it all at one time. You don't have
Mhm.
to write a paper. Sitting down and writing a paper, and I've written a lot of papers, do it in 15 and 20-minute chunks and take breaks in between. That's really helpful. So the chewable chunks, you kind of mentioned that notion is really important. And the other thing, if it's a tough task, there's something called temptation bundling. And what
Okay.
that is when you marry something kind of difficult with something that's pretty positive. So if I have to clean out the garage, I'll probably listen to a sports station, right? So I'm marrying something positive with something negative. Temptation bundling. If I have to do a lot of ironing, I might watch a movie. If I have to go exercise, I might bundle that with listening to nice music or walking with a friend. I mean, I walk 10,000 steps a day religiously. And 3 of those days, I walk with a friend I've had for 15 years. And we walk around the park and we have an enjoyable time. We converse, talk about everything, solve the world's problems, and do 10,000 steps a day. So temptation bundling is a really nice little thing to think about. Marry something positive with something that's not so positive. And then the last point I'd make, and I have lots of points, but I want to
That's
take the
okay.
ear's time. But I think there's a big myth about motivation,
Mhm.
and procrastinators oftentimes think they have to feel like doing something before they can do it, and that's just not true. Action is the thing that creates the opportunities and the moving forward. So if you can act and you get a feeling of momentum, you'll be motivated to do the task. You can't wait for inspiration. You can't wait. I never ever think that I'm going to like doing my income taxes, but I know I have to do them. And
Right.
so I do action first. And then after a while, sometimes you get into the task. It's not as difficult as you thought. Not every time. Sometimes it's really difficult. But a lot of the times it's not as difficult as you thought. And people do 15 minutes and they say, geez, I think I could do another 15. So the whole thing, the notion is, how do I finish? And you don't have to sit down and do everything at the same time. Was that helpful?
It is helpful. And, a lot of times I know for myself, when I will have a task to do, I really do feel like I have to do it from start to finish right
Right.
then and there.
Right.
And, there's no breaks, there's no drinks, there's no
Yeah.
nothing to stop me from getting it done. So if we could kind of back up a little bit,
Yep.
what do you suggest for people like me that feel like, yeah, no, I'm going to start it now. I'm going to get it all the way through, all the way done. And, then I'm like either wore out
Yes.
or I think, wow, I just missed an opportunity to do something else. So how can we train ourselves to break things up and do it in smaller groups and not feel guilty about it?
Yeah, no, you're describing the feeling, the experience of a lot of people. I think that one of the things is, and what happens is when you do something like that and you spend hours and hours and hours,
Mhm.
you get exhausted, right? And even
Right.
when you get done, oftentimes you don't feel victorious. It's just, oh, it's done. Thank God, as opposed to, oh my God, I finished. So one of the
Right.
ways you can kind of enhance it is make your progress visible. And so if you sit down for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or half an hour, I can usually sit down for a half an hour before my mind begins to wander a little bit. I used
Mhm.
to be able to do an hour, but I'm a little bit older. And I work in 30-minute increments. And then I also take a 10-minute break. 30 minutes, 10-minute break. And I can do 5 really good work hours with these breaks every day. And in the afternoon, I do some light stuff like some email returns, but real thinking work and talking to people and things like that. It's
Mhm.
in the heart of the day. And what I do, it's like I use Post-its. I have 10 Post-its and they represent 30 minutes of work. And I have it on a whiteboard across my office. And every time I do the reading or the writing, or I'm talking to some people and my smartphone goes ding, that says, okay, that's 30 minutes, Pat. This might sound peculiar, but it's an amazing thing. I get off my chair and I physically walk across the room to the whiteboard, and I take one of those Post-its and I rip it up.
Oh.
And it's a wonderful feeling. It's like you hit a home run or a tennis ball really well, or a golf club. It's a
Mhm.
physical interaction of getting up, going over the whiteboard, ripping that thing up. And then you did it 4 or 5 times, and the Post-its are getting less and less and less. So you're marking your progress. For some people, it might be an agenda that they have every day.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, what we do with agendas is we have way too much on our agendas. And
Right.
but then they score it out with a big red marker, so it's very visible. I have my agenda on a yellow sheet of paper, so it's very visible. And every time I accomplish one of the tasks on my agenda, I take a black marker and I score it through, and it feels wonderful. So any way you can make your progress visible, and do this notion around chewable chunks, 20 and 30-minute periods of time, because
Mhm.
your brain needs a break, right? I mean, just to plow through it, your brain needs a little bit of a break. And the thing you want to watch out for when you take a break is not getting to social media. So then you'll find yourself investigating bamboo curtains in China and Thailand. I mean, you want to stay
Right.
away from social media. The other thing
Well,
too, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
The other thing too is, and that's really important for especially adults, is rewards work. And sometimes adults say, "Oh, I shouldn't need rewards. I should be more disciplined, and I shouldn't, be more mature than that." And the problem with that thinking is it'll get you caught in a procrastination cycle. Rewards, research is very strong. Rewards work very powerfully because the anticipation of the reward, that could be a lunch with a friend, a walk with a friend, that could be reading a novel. I mean, could it be a glass of
Mhm.
wine at the end of the day? You look forward to that, and that can kind of propel you forward. Rewards work. So get your reward map. We call it a reward map. What are 5 or 10 things that you could reward yourself with? It can't always be food, obviously, or drink,
Sure.
but different kinds of activity. And every the task is done, boom, you have a reward waiting for you, and you're going to enjoy yourself. And get away from the shoulds, because the shoulds don't help you.
Okay. And so when we talk rewards, maybe that could be their social media time,
That could be.
right?
It's just that the danger of that socially, like for me, it's stocks, right? So I invest a little bit. And if I take my 10 minutes, I'm looking at my stocks. Oh my God, if I'm going up, I feel like a genius. If I'm going down, I don't feel so smart. And
Right.
that could kind of turn you around. So what we suggest is somewhere in the day, take maybe a 30-minute break, maybe at lunch, and do your social media thing while you're kind of eating your food. But if you do it in between these 10-minute slots, you
Mhm.
can go down a rabbit trail pretty quickly. But you got to use what works for you.
Sure. So let's go back to what you just kind of mentioned a word there, should. I know
Yes,
we fall into the trap of the shoulda, woulda, coulda. So
yes.
talk to us more about the dangers of the should.
Well, there's a lot of kind of theories that people have that are disconnected from reality, right? And when you say you shouldn't need a reward, well, who came up with that idea? If rewards work for
Hmm.
you, and they might not work for everyone, but they work for a lot of people, and the research really is strong in support of this, then get rid of your shoulds. I should sit down and do 6 hours of work. Boy, that's tough. I mean, and there's very little research to support plowing your way through. Now, there's some tasks you got to do, and you got to really stick to it. But if you operate every day saying, I just got to sit down and do whatever I got to do and punch this thing out, at the end of the day, you're going to be exhausted. The other thing I wanted to mention too is many years I used to have 10 things to do on my agenda every day.
Hmm.
And I have no idea where the 10 things came from. I must have read a book or something that said you should have 10 things. And I would do 6 or 7, which is a lot. And
Right.
I wouldn't get to 8 or 9. And I'd feel like, oh, geez, Pat, you didn't do much, And I said, there's something wacky about this. And I talked to a friend of mine who's a consultant. And he says, oh, I know your problem. Your agenda's too long. Cut your
Mhm.
agenda in half. I said, really? I said, yes, make sure you're doing the real important things every day. And if you do 5 or 6, that is a home run. And it changed my work life. The max I do is 6 things in a day. Now, they're not
Wow.
little trivial things. They're tasks you got to do that's really important.
Mhm.
And I usually 80% of the time, 90% of the time, I get them all done and I feel like $1,000,000. So that theory about I should have 10, that was my mistake until I got somebody else, a thought partner, to kind of help me out. Is that helpful at all?
Oh yes, that is. That is. Tell our listeners, because we do have some people that just listen and not watch, how
Right.
they can get a hold of you.
Oh, it's I have a big website we spent a lot of money on, and it's the Sanaghan Group. It's my last name, Sanaghan, the Sanaghan Group, and all the books and the papers I've written and the things that we do. We should do some executive team building. We do strategic planning and some other things, and it's just SanahanGroup.com, and all the books that we have are available on Amazon. So I appreciate you asking.
Oh, great, great. So tell me about the five negative myths about procrastination that need to be ignored.
Right. Well, one is, and I talked to a couple of them. One is that the procrastinators are lazy, and it's just not true. Most procrastinators are very hardworking, and a lot of them are very successful. And you have to get rid of that notion because that's a self criticism. That I must be lazy because I can't get my mind around this task here.
Hmm.
So it's not a question of lazy. See, laziness. The difference between laziness and procrastination is this: lazy people never feel anxious about their habit. They don't care, right? They don't care. They sleep late. They do what they do. But procrastinators have a lot of stress and anxiety. So that's the big difference, is the emotional reactions to the task. Lazy people, do it tomorrow, no big deal, right? I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Procrastinators, I say, oh my God, I didn't get it done today. I got to really figure it out. The another myth, and I talked a little bit about the willpower notion that people think they have a lot of willpower
Hmm.
in their back pocket, and that's not true. Willpower is a very small resource, and very small. It gets tired quickly. So it's not this big pool that you have in your backpack that you can just dip in all the time and say, oh, let me do some more willpower here to get this task done. It's a very small little pail. And it's like a battery that runs out of energy, right? Over time, it gets used, it just runs out of energy. Or, you're exercising, your muscles get tired. So
Hmm.
it's a limited resource. So you have to use it very strategically. And by that, I mean, for procrastinators, starting tends to be the hardest thing to do. That's the key. Once you start, something might happen, but getting started is the key. That's when you use your willpower, your limited resource, at the beginning of a task, along with some tools and techniques. So I've talked about a couple of those, or at
Hmm.
the end of a task. And for me, I have to use it at the end of the task. So when I mentioned about the income taxes, something I've
Right.
been battling with for 40, 50 years now, um, I don't need the beginning or the middle. I'm pretty good at that. It's the end. The last mile is the longest for me. So that's when I use my willpower and a couple tools and techniques to help me push through to the very end. So willpower is very limited. The myth is we have a lot of it. Another one was kind of created by Mark Twain, who's obviously a very bright guy, but he said something that I think is a very big misdirection. And he said that, if you have two frogs to eat the big one first. And that theory is pretty pervasive in time management people and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And the problem with that is procrastinators will never eat the big frog first because the big frog is too overwhelming, it's too complicated, it's scary. They'll just back away from it. But the small frog, I got a shot. The small frog is more chewable. I can chunk it out and not eat it at one time. I can eat it over a couple days. I could eat with a friend, make it a social activity. I could put some sauce on it to make it, whatever you temptation bundling to make it more pleasant.
Sure.
At the end of that small task, if you reward yourself, you feel like you're victorious, you feel successful, and now you have a lot of strategies you can use to tackle the big task. So when people say eat the big one first for procrastinators, that simply doesn't work.
That'll be definitely something to try, because I know like you said, all the time management courses and everything always teach you to, first kind of knock out the little things that you can do like really, really quick, but then do the bigger tasks and then work on, some of the smaller tasks that don't, take too much brain power, because usually by the end of the day, you're pretty tired. So that's where you said the willpower comes in.
That's when it comes in. Exactly. I worked for a Salesforce about 7 or 8 years ago, not the company Salesforce. It was a marketing firm. And I met with the president, and he knew where I was. I did some speeches that he was interested in. And he said, our salespeople having a hard time, making some sales. And, we tell them, hey, you take the toughest customer, you do that at 8:30 in the morning. And I said, can I make a suggestion? He says, yeah, because it ain't working. I said, have them make 4 or 5 phone calls they know they're probably going to be successful at. He said, but that's not the way we're doing it, Pat. I said, well, just try it. Try it for a week. And then in the 5th or 6th phone call, make that the tough sell. And what happened is these people would make these, cold calling is a very tough business. They would make calls. They'd have 3 out of 5 victories. They're feeling pretty confident. And now they can tackle the tough customer, as opposed to having the tough customer stick in their head at 8:30 in the morning and feel deflated from the very beginning. So doing the small thing first, getting momentum, getting experience, feeling successful is really helpful. And another thing that people can think about too, once again, adults sometimes think they shouldn't need to do this. A lot of times we remember what we didn't do. Like my little thing about the 10 things, and I didn't do the 2 things, and that's what I'm remembering and beating myself up about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really helpful to do what we call an accomplishments list, and to list what you've done and what you've been successful at, and have it very visible in your office or your workplace or wherever it is at home. Now people are working at home. And so you notice we always look at the gap versus the gain. Oh, I didn't do this, versus looking back and say, hey, this is a pretty good day. I did 5 hours of work today and did some productivity. So I think that's really important, is to have an accomplishments list so you can focus on the positive stuff, but you also you need to do some of the difficult things also, but not always looking at the gap, what you didn't do, reflecting back on what you did do. Is that helpful the way I'm kind of explaining that?
It is. And so another thing would be, if you had a list of 10 items,
yes,
and you knew you could accomplish 6 of those, that is more than half. Okay.
Yes.
But if you only accomplish those 6, the other 4, now do you move those to the next day, very first time of the day, or how do you do that?
Well, that's what time management people would say. Yes. Oh yeah. You make sure that for what you don't do the next day is have 14, right?
Right.
So, and then at the end of the week is 212, right? I mean, it's silly. But if you limit yourself to 10, like I said, I limit myself to 6. You say to yourself, okay, now these are the 4 I didn't get a chance to get to yesterday, is before I begin my day, as it were. I'm looking at my list of 6. Where are the priorities? So sometimes that might be time urgency. That might be a customer who's going to need a service. So you begin to reprioritize, but you stick to 6. And that's a big discipline, because you don't keep on making it bigger and bigger. What you do is keep it at 6. And that's just my number. It might be a different number for some other people. But that's what we used to do. I used to have 22 items sometimes when I was in my 30s. Like, how do you do 22 things? Well, I didn't do it on Thursday, didn't do it on Wednesday, so I'm packing it up on Friday. So stick with 6 or 7, whatever you feel comfortable with, and always say to yourself, okay, now I got to reprioritize what's essential for me to accomplish today.
Okay. So kind of explain to us, if you can, the process that you might go through. Say a business called you today, and kind of like that sales business, the salespeople that needed some help.
Right.
How do you kind of walk them through your training or what you have to offer? I mean, is there a time limit on it? Is there a day? It's all done in one day. How does that work?
Well, it all depends on what the challenge is, and a lot of it is talking with the person for a half an hour, 45 minutes, really kind of understanding what their challenge is around the procrastination. And I have a doctorate in organizational development, but I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Other
Mhm.
people can do that really well, and some people need that kind of therapy and support. And that's not a criticism; that's just a reality, because there might be a fear of success or a fear of failure. And I want to understand their world and some of the challenges. And a lot of times, and this is something that's really important, a lot of procrastinators are over aspirational. They try to accomplish way too much. And so, since I've been
Mhm.
around a long time and I've been in lots of different businesses, I can kind of say to myself before I say to them, boy, John or Mary, they're just trying to do too much, or they're
Mhm.
not delegating. I'll ask a question: how's your delegation skills?
Right.
And I would say about 80% of them go, ooh, not too good, Pat,
Mhm.
because it's hard to let go, especially if you're the boss of the applesauce, or you're a senior person who's been very experienced, to hand it off to someone junior, not
Mhm.
just to dump it to them, but hand them up and trust them to do a good job is very hard for a lot of senior leaders. So a lot of it's just kind of unpacking what their particular challenge is. And usually it's maybe 3 or 4 phone conferences. And there's one thing I like about the Zoom stuff, that you can see someone and get a feel for them. And it's because I'm not flying all over the place. I used to be on the road about 150 or 60 days a year,
Wow.
and those days are gone. I mean, I do about 3 days a month then, maybe now, and I don't see me running back to do 150 days more. Using this kind of Zoom technology, or whatever you call that, or Microsoft Teams, is really helpful. But
Sure.
really listening carefully on what their concerns are. And most people beat themselves up. And one of the things we do know is self care. And you talked about that earlier, about the simple life of purpose and things like that. Beating yourself up just gets the cycle going. And there's a lot of research that shows self compassion cuts the cycle off. Saying to yourself, boy, Pat, you could have had a better day, but you're a good person. Let's tackle it tomorrow. So I don't walk
Sure.
around with the guilt or the stress on my shoulders. That makes sense?
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break right now and we'll be right back. Do
Okay.
you have a project or service that you want the world to know about? Or would you like to have your business or project highlighted during the show to a wide audience? If you would like to be a guest or sponsor of the show, please contact us at info@openpagespublishing.com. That's info@openpagespublishing.com. Okay, and we're back. We're talking to Patrick Sanaghan tonight on how to be a productive procrastinator.
Right.
And he has written a book, and the title of the book is How to Be a Better Procrastinator. So, Patrick, where we left off, one question I had, over the last couple of years, what have you seen with people? Has procrastination increased, decreased, remained the same?
Yeah, it's a great question, Michelle. It's increased a lot, especially in the professional class. And when I say that, the only differentiation between, I mean, procrastination is cross-cultural. I could go to China tomorrow and I could meet 20% of their population of procrastinators. I could go to Nigeria. I could go to Cuba. I could go to the United States. It's
Mhm.
all over the place, and about the same level of participation in the habit. And so it's cross-cultural in nature. And so I'm sorry, I lost track of the question, Michelle. My apologies.
That's okay. That's okay. The question being, in the last couple of years
Oh,
with
it's
everything
increased.
that's happened.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's increased a
Yes.
lot because the boundaries, most of the people I deal with are in the professional class, and the boundaries
Okay.
are blurred. People working at home.
Mhm.
There's distractions at home. There's kids at home. There's the phone ringing. There's neighbors, talking in the backyard and picnics. I mean, it's a distraction circus, and distractions really get in the way of procrastinators. I mean, it really does. So you see, and a lot of times, if you're coming to a meeting and it's face to face, people wise,
Mhm.
it's very hard to say, "Oh, I didn't do that assignment, Michelle." But with a Zoom, it's a little bit easier to say, "Oh, I didn't get to that. I'll tackle that tomorrow." So there's not this soft accountability that works with the face-to-face interaction, and the blurred lines between professional tasks to do and personal tasks to do, and it just giving people more to do and more stress. And so
Right.
you see people's deadlines are getting pushed and pushed and pushed. and they're feeling
Okay.
bad about it. They're feeling bad about it.
Sure, sure. Now, along that lines, you say that most of us are distraction magnets.
Yes.
So, how do we manage our attraction to distraction?
Yeah, distraction, it just takes your attention. Attention is another thing like willpower, it's very limited. And if you've got a computer that's going dinging all the time, the emails, people say, "Oh my God, someone wants me or someone needs me," and it could be an emergency. That's the myth that a lot of people say. Oh, it could be an emergency, or the
Hmm.
telephone's ringing, or there's music in the background. Like when I work, it's very quiet space. Now, some people go to Starbucks to work. In fact, there's a lot of apps and programs out there that you can play the sounds of a coffee place, or a place where people play music.
Hmm.
They chatter in the background. Some people use raindrops. I mean, people use different things. For me, I know that I'm distracted too easily, so my home office is very, very, very quiet. A cluttered desk is another distraction.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times when people come down in that's say their home office and they go, oh boy, the desk is all kind of cluttered, and then they begin to kind of organize the desk, they're probably going to be in trouble. So what I would always suggest is look at the kitchen table. That's usually not as crowded as your desk is, right?
Hmm.
Or look at the dining room table. Just go someplace quickly where there's less distractions and less mess, and start your work. And towards the end of the day, when that kind of list of six is done, 3:30 in the afternoon or 4 o'clock, that's the time to tackle the mess of the next day, the clutter. So the next day you can start off clean. But if you start your day off kind of organizing your desk and putting your pens away and figuring out what your computer is, you're already in a rabbit hole, and it's not a smart strategy.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that idea. My desk is always very neat and clean, and
That's
I don't think anybody thinks I get any work done, but I have to have it that way.
yes,
But yeah, I totally agree with you. At the end of the day, clean it up so that when you come back in the morning, it's fresh and it's a new start, because it does kind of give you that clean slate.
yep,
And in going back to your rewards, reward yourself after you've
ab-
cleaned your desk back to the
absolutely,
way it should be.
absolutely,
I don't
absolutely.
think we give ourselves enough credit nowadays.
Like,
There's so much going on, and there's, like you said, so many distractions. And I personally, when I work from home, I do have a TV or something on in the background. I'm not watching it, not even listening to it, but
but
it is on
it
because
is
I
on.
like some kind of noise,
Yes,
quiet
Pe-
noise.
yeah. People are different. Some people really appreciate that little background. I have a friend of mine
Mhm.
who we write together. If the TV's not on, he can't write.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I said, Tom, I
absolutely.
don't understand that because I have to have complete science. So we've negotiated how do we use our writing styles. Sometimes I do
Mhm.
it differently than he does, and he does it differently like I do. But you're right. And I like the idea what you said. You come down with a clean slate. When you sit down and the desk is organized, well, you're going to win that day. And all I'm just trying to say is if it's really crowded because things got really busy the day before, maybe not starting there, but going someplace else. I usually go to when I have to do really tough writing because I can read at home with no problem all day long. When I have to write, the distractions, like I said, the stock market, what's going on. I turn off my apps because if those dings are happening. I go, oh, what's going on? And I go to a local library here, and they still have carousels, the old fashioned carousels used to
Mhm.
have back in the 70s and 80s, and I can get focused there. There's nothing to look at, and I can just get focused for about 5 hours, and then around 3 o'clock, all the students come in. That just happened today, actually, and they love to chatter and talk, and so I don't try to fight that. Right, I just leave, and then
Mhm.
my plan B. It's always good to have a plan B. I'm about a mile away from Delaware Valley University, here in Doylestown, and they have a quiet room. And if I really need to really focus on my concentration, my plan B is I drive there, and I do my quiet room research and writing, and it's so I have some options. I can leave the house, and we don't have too many distractions. We don't have kids in the house or anything like that anymore. But
Mhm.
there's people knocking on the door, and the mailman and Amazon deliveries, and all those distractions can really take you off your focus.
It can, and like you said, a lot of people are working from home now, and kids are running around, and the pets, and people trying to contact you. So I get it. I could see almost too how a procrastinator could almost turn into a lazy person because you just get so overwhelmed and you
Overwhelmed.
just don't know what's next. Are there any ways to avoid that piece?
Yeah, no, what you just said is the key. See what happens. You can't look at the whole elephant, right? I mean, that's the whole the
Mhm.
story or metaphor that how do you eat an elephant one piece at a time.
Right.
So you got to focus on, okay, Pat, now what's the first next step I got to focus in on? That's all you got to worry about. Not finishing, not the whole thing. What's the first thing I can do to start? And starting, like I said earlier, is the hardest part. And so you have to make starting easy. And there's two ways to doing that. One is to have some kind of routine. Like you said, you come down and you're ready to work in your home office. It's nice and clean.
Mhm.
That's a routine. When I go to walk, I said my 10,000 steps. When I first started doing it, especially this time in the winter, I'd say, okay, do I wear a hat today? And by the way, where are my gloves? And do I have boots here someplace? And it would take me about 5 minutes to get organized. And I get exhausted and frustrated and say, oh, let me go watch the news and have a cup of coffee or read the newspaper. Now what I do when I get up pretty early in the morning at 6, first thing I do is I put on my hat because I have to protect my skin. It's very fair. I put
Mhm.
on my hat. And that signals to me, that ritual says, Pat, you're going walking. And then I get my jacket, my scarves, and my gloves, or whatever it is, or my shorts, and my walking shoes. And within about a minute and a half, I'm out the door. So if you can routinize something, that's really a really helpful thing to do. And then sometimes people use rituals to get their mindset to move forward. And a ritual might be meditation. A ritual might be playing some nice music. A ritual might be, I have one executive who lights a candle with some incense,
Mm.
and it just calms her down, and she's ready to go. And she's a very, very successful person. So ritual sets a psychological context different than a routine, but both those things can be very helpful in starting, because starting is the hardest part for procrastinators, but not looking at the whole thing or trying to accomplish the whole thing. And I think I mentioned that once you get into it, oftentimes you say, well, let me do another 15, 20 minutes. This is not as awful as I thought it was. There was a math professor who did a big research project a couple of years ago, and she dealt with math phobics. People say, oh my God. He said, I'm stressed. I'm anxious. I don't want to talk about math. And she was a very good teacher, which helps, right?
Mhm.
And she taught them a little bit about simple math and the more complicated math. And their anxiety levels, they measured their anxiety levels and stress levels went down. And almost to a person, they said, this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I had
Wow.
this myth in my head that made it bigger than life. Now, she was a very good teacher, an excellent teacher, and neutralized all that negative stuff. And they learned to do their math without all the stress and anxiety. So getting into it is a really important thing to do.
Okay. So let's talk about using an accountability partner. I know you mentioned that earlier in the broadcast.
Right.
So, how can we find an accountability partner, and
Well,
how can we utilize their time the best?
right. Okay. Good. Well, the first thing you can do a couple things. There's some organizations out there and some programs out there where they can match you up with somebody to work with. But an accountability partner is a little bit different than a thought partner. A thought partner is someone who thinks differently than you do. And I
Mm.
have about 4 of those in my life, my career. And they just think differently because they can expose a blind spot that I'm not seeing. So having thought partners is really helpful. An accountability partner is another level of play. An accountability partner, let's say you were my accountability partner and you were someone I knew and I respected, and I would give my word to, right? I
Mhm.
would say, Michelle, I'm getting this paper done by the end of the month. So now I've got my reputation on the line with someone I trust and respect and might even have great affection for.
Mhm.
And so that accountability partner could check in with you once in a while instead of waiting to the day before it's due and say every other Wednesday, I'll give you a quick email and just see how you're doing. I'll give you a phone call. So it's holding you accountable for your word, but the person you give your word to is the key. That's different than a thought partner. Did I explain that all right?
Yes. Yes.
Very powerful notion. Very powerful notion.
It is. And I've utilized accountability partners, I've utilized mentors, and
Yep.
there is a fine line there. And I know, it's very important to be respectable of their time.
Yes.
And, even with mentors, I know that, you want to make sure that if they give you information or a suggestion, that you at least try it.
Yes.
So when you talk about your accountability partners, um, are they just keeping you accountable, or are they giving you support
Yes.
and help to finish your tasks?
Yes.
Are
They
they
can't.
a hands-on or hands-off?
Right. No. You can make that request at the time. You might say, Michelle, if you could call me every Friday morning to see how I'm progressing, I'd really appreciate that. And that's what I say. Someone that cares about you, you care about them. So there's a relationship there. It's just not, not a professional thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, Michelle, if I get stuck, could I give you a holler and talk through some stuff? Would that be okay to do? That's really building a soft accountability that really be very supportive. So it's not being mean. Now they have an organization, it's an app you can called Stick, STICKK.com.
Okay.
And what you do there, you say, I'm going to finish the paper by the end of the month, and you give them money.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say $100 or $500. And then if you can't show that the paper has been done, guess what? They keep your money.
Oh, wow.
That's an accountability practice that is a whole different ballgame. So I don't like that particularly. I'm not saying it doesn't work for people. A lot of people, I know 2 people who've used it, and I get nothing from their company. I mean, I don't even know where they're located.
Right.
But that's a tough accountability. I'd rather do someone I do have some respect with that could ask for help and support and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Am I being too ambitious here, do you think, Michelle? And yeah, I think you are, Pat. Maybe it's going to be 6 weeks and not 4 weeks. Okay. I give you my word in 6 weeks, and I'll check in with you every Friday at 9:00.
That's a great idea. That's good. That's really good. So, as a procrastinator, okay, if there's a task that we want to do,
Yep.
but maybe we know we're not going to be that good at it, and it's going to take a lot longer to do if we try and do it by ourselves, would it be best to trade off tasks with other people?
Sure. A couple things. That's really, really good notions here. It's really important to ask for help. And if you haven't done something before, it's going to be hard. Learning has a price attached to it, right? If I'm going to try to learn French, the first few weeks are going to be very, very, very difficult. So asking for help for somebody else, mentor, like you said, you use your mentors, thought partners and things like that. Asking for help is really important. Finding out who else has done this task. You're not that unique that this task or this paper or this cleaning out the garage is the only person in the world that's ever done that. And asking for help, getting on YouTube. I'm writing a book right now, and all I've done so far, and I've done a lot of academic research, I'm going on TED Talks and YouTubes and videos on this particular topic. And I'm not doing the traditional research trail that I always do. And I can go on YouTube and listen to some of the world's experts in particular topics. So getting that kind of information, but being kind to yourself and not expecting you to be at the A level at the very beginning. You might get there over time, but you have to be more forgiving of the mistakes and the fumbles that you will have going forward.
And that's where our rewards are going to come in, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing to think through too, I think is that there's another myth, and I know I'm backtracking a little bit, about more choices is better. And procrastinators are great at brainstorming ideas, and we're going to do this and this and this and this and this. And there's a great book called The Paradox of Choice. Okay. And it's by a guy named Barry Schwartz out of Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. And he's a faculty member there. And the research was mind-blowing for a lot of people. And he says more choices are not better for most people, especially procrastinators, because we get overwhelmed with 12 and 15, and how am I going to figure it out? He said 3 to 5 is max. That's all you need to make good decisions. So don't sit there and start brainstorming a bunch of stuff and getting overwhelmed. Say to yourself, I want to come up with 3 or 5 options, choices. And then there's a professor from Penn, a woman professor from Penn, and her research says all you need is 3 options or 3 choices, and that's plenty. So more choices isn't better, but it feels like it's better. That's a smart thing to do and brainstorm ideas and get overwhelmed. They don't start them all. That's the other thing people do. If they read the book, I hope they do. They'll say, oh, I like this idea and this idea and this idea. Whoa. Slow down. Pick one idea. Try it for a week and see what happens. Not 5 or 6 or 7. I mean, it's silly. But that's kind of our ambition and aspiration. So just take one idea and apply it. And the last thing I want to say, there's a Nobel laureate, and I'm trying to remember, Daniel Kahneman. He's out of Princeton. And he won the Nobel Prize in, I think, 2012 in economics. And this was really kind of the big theme in his research, which I think is very powerful. He says we're really bad at estimating how long something's going to take and how hard it is. And that's pervasive across the world. So his advice is thought partners, mentors, accountability partners. Cut your goals in half and give yourself more time, and you'll accomplish a lot more.
Yes, I think that's great, because it is true. If we gave ourselves, three choices, if we work those three out and they work, that would be great. But even if we still had two more kind of sitting there just in case as a backup,
Right.
then maybe we wouldn't get as overwhelmed. So, Patrick, go ahead and tell us again, for those who are listening and not watching, what your email address is and what your website is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my email address is my last name, Sanaghan, Sanaghan, the G is silent, at AOL.com.
Okay.
And if you just put that in your search function there, it'll take you to our webpage. And there we'll describe the things that we do and the projects we do and the books we've written and things like that. So the SanaghanGroup.com will take you right to that. And my personal email or professional email is Sanaghan@AOL.com. And some of my colleagues rib me about the AOL.com because it sounds a little bit old fashioned, but it's my name. I'm not going to give that up. So it's Sanaghan@AOL.com.
We have just a couple minutes left. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with my listeners?
Yeah, this is the last thing I want to take away is this. Be kind to yourself. Procrastinators beat themselves up. And just imagine if you had a good friend and they came to you with a problem, you're not going to criticize them. You're going to listen to them. You'll help try to solve their problem. You'll show empathy. Just do that for yourself. Be kind to yourself, and that will help you manage your procrastination better. And the minute you hear the shoulds in your head and being critical, it's not a good place for you to be. So be kind to yourself would be the last piece of advice that I would share.
That is wonderful advice. Patrick Sanaghan, I thank you for coming on the show tonight and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Michelle. This is wonderful. You're a great interview. I appreciate it. Take care.
Good. All right.
Bye-bye.
So this is Michelle Bannister, and I do want to remind you to, hey, stop procrastinating. Start today and live the life you were meant to live.
That's great. Thank you.